How did they sneak this 8 to 5 on us? I thought it was 9 to 5.
Poor Dolly Parton. Capitalism has made a liar out of her. Not only does that 8 hours no longer include a lunch break, if you're like most white-collar workers, you probably spend your lunch break eating a salad over your keyboard replying to emails. And 5 p.m., you're not leaving at 5 p.m. because you don't want to look lazy and no one else has left their desk yet. Of course, by the time you get home, you'll have a few new emails from your boss in your inbox, so if you're lucky, you'll get done by 9 p.m. Then there's the gig economy, which pays so little that Uber drivers and delivery workers have to work all day, every day, just to afford food. So how did the companies trick us into this? Well, consider that it was unions and the labor movement who brought us the 8-hour workday to begin with. They fought for decades so that workers would have enough time to live a life, see their families, and sleep. So I think it's hardly a coincidence that the erosion of the 8-hour workday has coincided exactly with a dramatic drop in union membership caused by corporate union busting. So if we want to save the 8-hour workday, we need to start working collectively, unionize our workplaces, and fight back together.
So in this TikTok, Adam Conover points out two big things. That is both the relationship between labor unions and working conditions, and secondly, the fact that working conditions have gotten much more miserable for working people in the United States today. However, there are two things that I want to touch on to expand on what Adam Conover is saying. The first thing is that Adam Conover suggested that workers had been tricked into these new working conditions where hours are longer, we're expected to answer our phones and emails at any time in the day, and we have people like driving for Uber and Lyft where they basically have to work constantly in order to survive. This is not something that workers were tricked into. This is something that workers were coerced into. Now, how were workers coerced into this? Workers were coerced structurally into this through a combination of the government going out of its way to specifically deny benefits to working class people. That is to say, actively denying healthcare, housing, food, things that in other countries might be guaranteed or taken care of. Because we have to rely on our working conditions in order to meet those basic material needs, we are forced and coerced into basically whatever working conditions are available to us. Capitalists, knowing that the structure of the state denying people basic benefits and protections allows them to exploit workers even more. And because these capitalists know this, they will work in tandem with each other to suppress the wages of the working class. There's also another thing that I think is worth noting and expanding upon. You see, when Adam Conover mentioned unions fighting for these benefits, the harsh reality is that was very explicit and real. Now, to be clear, labor unions in their origin and when they started asking for higher wages, basically just formed as bodies for collective bargaining, and they threatened to go on strike unless they got higher wages or better working conditions. But what was the response from the capitalists, and what was the response from the government? The response from the capitalists was swift and violent. They quite literally hired private security and mercenaries in order to violently suppress the workers who were unionized. And now you might think, well, that's going pretty far. What did the government do? Well, in some instances, like they did to coal miners in West Virginia, the government came in to drop bombs on them. That's right. The United States government brought in the military to defend who? Not the workers, but the capitalists who are trying to prevent their workers from unionizing. Now, this is where we need to understand something very, very critical. And that is an idea that is central to socialist theories of governments. And that is the idea that the state can either act as a dictatorship of capitalists or a dictatorship of workers. Now, the dictatorship of the proletariat in this sense really is what the founding fathers called a tyranny of the majority, which is basically understanding the fact that there are far more workers than there are capitalists. So you'd think in a democratic system that the state would be representing the interests of workers more so than it would capitalists. But you see, the founding fathers structured the United States in such a way to essentially guarantee that the richest and most reactionary would always have more institutional power, that the United States would always be there to serve the interests of capital. This being the reality, the government, as it does today, back then created institutions and created the conditions that suppressed the interests of the workers. Just look at the Supreme Court, for example, which used trust-busting laws in order to shut down collective bargaining attempts. Think about that for a second. They used laws that were supposed to be against giant corporations against the workers that were unionizing against those corporations. So with this understanding, it becomes very, very clear that while workers hope to peacefully achieve their progress, what ended up happening was violent suppression from the state and violent suppression from the capitalists. But because these workers managed to hold the line and continue to strike in the face of all this, they denied capitalists their ability to make wealth off of their labor. And believe it or not, this is the really interesting part, capitalists can't make money without workers. Weird how that works. So these strikes, as they started to grow and expand nationwide, because most workers, believe it or not, were deeply upset about the fact that the government was violently responding to their peaceful efforts to collectively bargain, led to a mass mobilization across the country, and out of fear that socialism might rise in the United States, that workers might organize some sort of revolution against the government that was participating with the capitalists to suppress their interests, the government capitulated. It maintained the system where capitalists maintain general control over policy and things like that, but gave workers enough concessions in order to appease some of their immediate needs. But here is where the problem rests. The problem rests with the fact that capitalists are always seeking to expand their profits, and because of this, capitalists will always fight to push workers into the worst conditions possible, into the absolute worst conditions and lowest wages that workers can tolerate. And they know that as long as they pause between lurches backwards, what exists now will become the new normal, which allows them to constantly push this sort of reactionary slide. And this is where the United States is right now. And if you're wondering why Democrats aren't going out of their way to be more active in the labor movement as it is, the harsh reality is that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are both largely bought and paid for by the giant corporations that are doing the union busting. Just look at this article that highlighted the fact that Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks, was being considered by Hillary Clinton as her labor secretary. So the fundamental problems that workers were dealing with 100 years ago, which is to say the state serving the interests of capitalists, is the very problem we are dealing with today. And I don't think that it's any coincidence that as workers are starting to increase their unionization across the country, Joe Biden and the Democrats, alongside the Republicans, are actively increasing police spending across the country. Because while Democrats might in theory care about winning elections, what they care more about is the donations that they get from super PACs and the wealthy individuals that run these companies donating to their campaign.
This is Ben Carollo with Rebel Headquarters. You can catch my show Galaxy Brain on the Young Turks Twitch channel every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to stay up to date with my content, you can follow me at Benjamin Carollo on Twitter. And for those of you that might be wondering or have noticed, my pronouns are in fact she, her.